Welcome to the Studio Chat podcast. My name is Barbara Thompson. Each week, I'll be bringing you a self-care expert or a message to help you to discover how to live your best life and understand your mind-body connection. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now, let the Studio Chat begin. Hello, this is the third podcast we're recording today with Beth, talking about anticipatory grief, euthanasia, spirituality of when we lose our beloved pet. So again, if you're just tuning into this episode, you haven't listened to number 1, number 2. Hi, my name's Barbara, and I'm the founder of the Studio Chat podcast, where we talk about I like to give you real, honest conversations about how to deal with things in life and to make it a really wholesome, safe, comfortable place. It's just like you're here with me, you're one of my girlfriends, one of my friends, and we're just talking about things. And so I have Beth joining me. Hello, Beth.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for tuning in today.
And so today we're going to talk about, I think we'll start with euthanasia because it's a word that most people know. It's a word that I knew about, but until I had to, with my first loss of my first dog, Floss, my pug, I didn't have the information that I thought animals just passed when they passed. Like if a human's old, they just die of old age. I really thought that when animals passed, and this does happen to some, absolutely. But I just thought it was like a natural cause. I didn't think you had to make a decision. I was very new to all of that. So with the euthanasia decision, with my first loss, the vet made the decision for me, really. And seeing that happen was very traumatic and very hard. And the second time with Maisie 4 months ago, I had to make, it was a decision that it was on my shoulders, where it was like, okay, now it's getting into the territory where she became diabetic in her last week of life with her Cushing's disease and recurrent UTIs and all sorts of things happening. I think now's the time to start thinking about it. So, I also have been on the other end where I've had to make a decision. So I don't know, where do you want to start with talking about euthanasia? Do most people know what it is when it comes to terms with our beloved pets?
Well, that's entirely based on the experience you've had, right? I mean, there are many people who grew up with animals who their animals died naturally, or their animals ran away and never came back, or at least that's what their parents told them,
Yeah.
So there are some people that have never encountered euthanasia. What I find with a lot of the people I work with in pet loss grief counseling is that many people have encountered the idea of euthanasia, but they've never had to make the decision themselves, because oftentimes it was their parents perhaps making the decision for a family animal. And a lot of people I work with, they're coming to me because it's their first major loss as an adult from an animal that they were the guardian for. So for many people, even if you sort of know what it is, it's your first time having to make the call. And that is a difficult thing. Was that your case in your experience? That was your first time you were going to make the call with?
Yeah, with Maisie.
Yeah. With Maisie.
No. Yeah. With Maisie, it was a conversation with the vet that she was becoming incontinent and just leaving little wet patches around the house. And I took her in for some tests, which presented to be a very high glucose level. She had diabetes, so I had to inject her with insulin. And that's when the conversation with the vet said, look, we got to the stage where we're plugging all these holes. Like, she had some seizures, so she was on seizure medication. She got 3 or 4 really bad bloody UTIs all in a row. So she had to be on antibiotics. And then she had the Cushing's disease, and then now diabetes. So he was just looking at her levels, and she was just turned 12. He said, her levels are so high, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to ever bring them down, but when they've been that high, that's red flags for a stroke or a heart attack or sudden death. And he goes, I really don't want that for you. And then so the conversation obviously went around that it's almost like a hidden, when you're an animal parent or pet parent and you go into the vets and they say, well, it's time, the word actually, that word in my experience and my talks with my vet was never used.
Interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Wow.
I don't think we even, no, it wasn't used. It was just like time to say goodbye and stuff. Like it was a common thing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm very pro using the word euthanasia so that everybody knows exactly what we're talking about, when we talk about it. I'm a big fan of using that word with children, and I'm a big fan of using that word with people I work with, and to be very open and honest that, this is a medical procedure where we stop our animal's heart from working and their body shuts down. We have to be very honest about what it is. And of course, many people struggle with the feeling like, oh, I'm killing my best friend and I'm signing a death warrant, and all those things come up. And many people prefer to use a word like put down or put to sleep, which for children is very confusing. But for many people, it's hard to say. I'm trying to normalize us. We're just saying, I euthanized, my animal, and that it's okay to say that. And euthanasia, actually, the root words of it, it means a good death is what the word means when you break down the roots of it.
Yeah. I found it such a hard thing to get my head around at first because even my other dog, Floss, was very sick, and the vet, like, as doing the procedure and stuff, I just watched it and was just like, who are we as human beings to make that choice? Like, even if you have a bit of a spiritual belief or something, it's kind of a hard thing to sit with, because like, what happens if I can get another 3 months out of them? What happens if I did it too early? Who am I to, it's only now we can do it. Like, I don't know in the States, but here there's some states here that you can actually, if you want to go, when you've got a terminal disease or something, you can sign a form and that kind of stuff is coming in. But before, you couldn't do it with humans, but you can do it with animals. Like, it was such a hard, who am I to play God? Who am I to do that? Like, you're killing, like, it's the language and it's how you do it. But I think it's just the guilt, and it's the whole, when's the right time? And it's the whole, it's death. So if none of us have experienced actually seeing something pass away, it's that whole death. And when you go through that moment in that room in that vet clinic, things happen to your body and things happen to you that you have no control out of, because it's very primal. But I think the whole euthanasia and talking about when it's time is such a personal decision, and it really needs to be your own. Look, let's just be honest, it's never going to feel the right time. It's never going to feel the good time. And the shitty thing about my second experience with this is my animal, she was 12, she looked beautiful and still looked like a puppy, and she still looked pretty good, and she was still really happy and being her cheeky self and still eating and still going, like, still great. Wasn't like, obviously her insides weren't the best, and that was really hard for me to almost, I kind of looked at it as I put everything out on the table in front of me and looked at everything that was going on and all my options, and just kind of just looked at it from afar and like, this is my situation, this is everything that can happen. And that helped me make my decision. But I listened to my vet too, because the decision wasn't about me. That's really hard for me. The second time when I had to make that decision, was I had to step back from myself, because selfishly I'd still want her now, and she could have still been here now, who knows, right? But I knew in my gut, and this is what I know to be true with all the stuff I've learned about myself and when I work with people, is getting to know yourself and how you feel in situations. And when I got the phone call from him and he said she was diabetic, and I said, okay, I'll come down tomorrow. And he said, no, you need to come down tonight. I've booked a special appointment. You need to learn how to draw the needle. You need to, and for me, I was like, so deep down in that moment when I was told I'm going to have to inject my dog with a needle every day, I knew in the back of my head, yeah, that's not okay, because of how sick she was already. So we all have different boundaries and different things. And she was such a superstar with it. But looking back, I knew that was maybe a sign that I got that gut punch feeling in my tummy, that I was like, I think maybe the time. And then I had I asked my vet, don't be afraid. I asked him so many questions and scenarios and like everything, but I had to remove personally, and this is only my experience. There's no right or wrong here, but I had to remove myself and be like, what is best for Maisie? But also in her specific circumstance, what could change? So history with her is when she did get really sick or she had a seizure, would be always at 2:00 in the morning. And where I live, the closest 24-hour vet clinic is about an hour and 20 minutes drive. So I'm not close to anything. So that was always in the back of my mind too, of, okay, if things do take a turn, the vet has told me what could happen. Could I live with that? Like, is that going to be okay for her? Am I going to be okay that there is a possibility that she could die on my arms, or she could have a stroke or a big seizure and I couldn't. I just couldn't do it. So there was that, like, I never wanted to do it. It was not easy. It wasn't as if I was like, oh yes, this is the right decision. Like, it's something that you do battle back and forth for the rest of your life.
100%. And a very important question that when I work with people on the anticipatory side, people who are making decisions about euthanasia, is a big question we ask is, what is your personal, all right, it's very personal, what is your personal risk tolerance for catastrophe? Because for many of our animals where we are considering euthanasia, we know something is going on that is going to progress, that is going to evolve. And it's very important that you know from a medical standpoint what those risks could be.
Yeah.
And as you said, for some now that, but listen, that's why when I say personal, I mean personal. I work with people who have absolute risk tolerance, 1,000. They're 100% comfortable with the idea that, yeah, I know if I don't euthanize, my dog might have a cardiac event, my cat might have a life-ending seizure in front of me, and I'm comfortable with that. And then there's other people who have a 0% ability to risk that. And they say, there is not even 1% of me that can tolerate having something like that happen. And if that is even a 1% possibility, I want to euthanize. And that's a deeply personal thing, but it's a great question to ask yourself and a great way to assess the situation. What's my risk tolerance for catastrophe?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's, like, how do we know if someone is at the moment in this position where their dog is ill, or they've had conversations with their vets that euthanasia may be an option? Is there anything that people can do to just help them make a decision, or,
Well, yeah, that's one question that's good to ask about the risk tolerance. I often ask the question, if your animal died naturally in their sleep tonight, would you feel like it was too soon? And sometimes that is a very telling question about where things are.
But I think most people would say it was always too soon, because you never want to say goodbye.
A lot of people would say it would be a relief, because I know they're suffering. I know they're not getting better. I know there's no coming back from this. I know the cascade of medical events has started, and that my cat or dog or guinea pig or bunny is not going to ever be quite who they were. And I don't know how much worse I want it to get for them. And so if it happened overnight in their sleep, it would feel like a relief. A lot of people I work with would say that. And that's a good question. That's why it's a good question to ask.
That's a good question, because for me, I was like, oh no, I'd be really not good with it. So
you would be, but then that gets us to the other question. Is it about you, or is it about her?
Yeah,
that was because the biggest thing we have to do, and what you just said there, that was about you. That wasn't about her, right?
Yeah.
And the biggest thing we have to learn in anticipatory grief and in leading up to euthanasia is we have to center our animal in the experience. It is not about us. This is their end of life. This is their completion of life. And it is my belief, our obligation, our duty, and our absolute honor and privilege that we get to step up and support them all the way through to the very last moment. What a gift that we can do that for them after all they've done for us. And the number one thing we have to do that well is we have to center their end of life experience. And in order to do that, we have to set some of our own feelings aside. We have to set aside that desire that we want them to live forever and really focus on what's best for them right here, right now. And look, there's a lot of ways to measure this too. I mean, when you ask, like, what do people practically do who are considering this? There's many different, they're called quality of life scales. Your veterinarian would have them. They're available online. And there are different areas. Some scales use 4 different areas. Some scales use 6 different areas. But to give you a real honest assessment, how is your animal doing day to day in these categories? And if you track that, and start keeping track of, okay, we've had, 6 bad days in a row, and then we had a couple good days, and here's how we're kind of scoring on that end of life assessment each time. You can get very objective, numbers-based views on how things are actually going. And you got to keep yourself honest about that too, because you can't start sliding the scale around, just because you want it to be. So I recommend, in conjunction with working with your, veterinary team, I recommend using a quality of life scale and assessment and recording daily, like what you're seeing, how your animal's doing, how many good days versus bad days are we having, and also centering them in their quality of life. And most of the time, if we are facing a euthanasia decision, and not in every case, there are other circumstances for euthanasia, but if we are facing euthanasia due to a physical or cognitive decline that we know isn't going to get any better, then we have to ask ourselves how long we're willing to let it go on behalf of our animals. Another question I ask is, what would I want? Because some people are willing to say, as long as my animal is, eating and drinking, I'm not going to do it. And they have to set that boundary. Like, everyone has their own parameters for how far am I willing to go. But for me, if I put myself in the position, well, yes, I can still eat or drink, but I can't go outside for walks like I used to. And I have arthritis pain, and I have a tumor that's causing me pain, and I'm on 8 different medications, and I don't like taking medications. And, I'm having trouble finding my way to the litter box or whatever it is. I really try to put myself in that position and be like, yes, I'm still eating and drinking, but how's the rest of my life going? And sometimes that's very helpful for people to really imagine it for themselves. What would I want? So that's another way to kind of think about it.
Yeah. Because a lot of people, I think it is the hardest decision to do, and people dart around it, don't want to talk about it. But I want to honor people that when you make a decision, it's still really tough. And even on the day when you've made the decision and you follow through, it's just not easy, because you just don't want them to go. So I think that's the hardest thing. And even like with both of my experiences, I was lucky enough to spend a whole week with each of them individually and do fun things and not with, even though with Floss, I didn't know it was her time, but she was going for a checkup, but I still, actually, it was just how it all worked out. I spent a week with her and got to say all the things, but I know a lot of people don't. So, and sometimes that decision has to come. I know some experiences where an animal will go in for a routine dental or a routine something and get a phone call saying that the animal, they found something and that, what do you want to do? So sometimes these decisions get thrust upon us very out of the blue, and you're going to make that decision kind of then and there. So that's also something. Yeah.
And to that, I always say to people, this is something my pet loss therapist said to me when I was going through my own work, is she always says your goodbye begins on day 1. And she's not wrong about that. And so many of us don't want to think about that when we have a puppy or a kitten. We don't want to think about the end. But the truth is, our animals can die at any time. And if there's anything I've learned about doing the work I do, unexpected things can happen all the time. So I really recommend to people, when their animals are young and healthy or everything's fine and calm, really work through some end of life details in advance for yourself. And that just looks like asking yourself questions. What does my beloved value most in life? Making a list of the things I want to make sure my animal's able to do and their values. How do I feel about death and dying? This is great journaling topics, right? Like, how do I feel about it? Do you believe you should do everything in your power to preserve your animal's life for as long as possible? Is that something that you really believe in? Are there any conditions under which you would want to either stop treatment or euthanize your animal? Like, what are some of your hard lines on that? What are your hard lines on financial considerations? is that a factor for how you were going to treat your animal or euthanize? Does their age become a consideration when things are going on? There's a whole range of things you can do when a problem arises, depending on how much time you have. You can do everything as possible to treat it. You can do everything you can up to a certain limit. You can focus on more like comfort care, hospice care, or you can euthanize, there's ranges of things. But if you've never thought any of that through, it can be very overwhelming. I think every guardian should think through what happens if my animal goes in for a dental and they find a tumor all over her body. What do I do? I think we should work that through, before you ever have to encounter something like that. And hopefully you don't, but to acknowledge that it's a possibility and that you may be faced with this decision, and just to check in with yourself, how do I feel about any of these questions, can be very powerful and helpful to you later on, having just encountered them once before in some journaling.
Yeah. So with euthanasia, it kind of brings something, and I hadn't heard about it until obviously doing the work I do now and my studies and my learning, but there's something called anticipatory grief. Can you share with people, because I think people go through it, but they don't actually know it has a name and don't know what it is?
Yes. Anticipatory grief is really my favorite grief, my friends, if there is such a thing. I'm very passionate about anticipatory grief, getting the word out that this is such a thing that exists and that there is support and help for it. This is the thing that saved my life when Arnie got his first cancer diagnosis, this anticipatory grief work I did. So it's so important. So yes, anticipatory grief is the grief that we experience when we know that our beloved has an end date coming that we can recognize. So in other words, it's not really, most people aren't feeling anticipatory grief the day they bring their puppy home, even though they know someday the dog will die. But this is something we experience when we get a diagnosis of some sort, a terminal diagnosis or a difficult disease, when we get a diagnosis of dementia in our animals, any illness that we know, kidney failure, heart failure, any diagnosis that we know is going to have a trajectory that they're not going to be able to recover from, or not good odds of, surviving it. So that is when we get anticipatory grief. And for some people, it's only a few hours that they're in that space. And for some people, it's years. Some people go through very long, extended periods of anticipatory grief. Also, there is something called ambiguous grief that I always like to mention. That is another type of grief that often goes hand in hand with ambiguous grief, or with anticipatory grief. And ambiguous grief, in the context of our animals, is often when our animal's medical condition or cognitive condition makes it so they're no longer themselves. So in other words, if you had an animal who loved to snowboard and kayak with you, and now because of their osteosarcoma, they can no longer do any of those active things, you are also grieving the loss of they're here, but not really here, because they're no longer kind of who they were or how they were. So those two things often work together. And ambiguous grief brings up, or ambiguous and anticipatory grief brings up all kinds of feelings like, when are they going to die? I don't know how my life will go on. I will never be happy again. I want to do everything I can to fight for my animal. When I'm doing my medical treatments with her, I feel like she hates me. I want this to be over. I want some relief. I'm afraid of the future. I'm afraid of what will happen if she dies. All the gifts and guidance and lessons and teaching she taught me will be gone. I feel angry. I feel powerless. I am full of dread. I am a shadow of who I was, and I'm incredibly uncomfortable with the uncertainty this brings. And so all those feelings lead us to, behave in ways we might not normally behave. We might not sleep. We might be helicopter parenting our animal. We may not be taking care of ourselves anymore. And a lot of people walk around saying, I don't know why I'm upset. He's not dead yet. Why am I so upset? And people kind of minimize and judge their own pain. And what they don't understand is that anticipatory grief impacts us in so many ways. We are making very complex medical decisions. We're trying to understand the prognosis. We're trying to understand diagnostics. We're trying to understand treatments. We're fighting for care. We're searching for specialists. We're trying to anticipate and respond to symptoms, right? Or am I going to miss a symptom and it's going to be all my fault? So there's a lot of medical pressure on us. There's logistical pressure on us, a lot of financial pressure. A lot of people go into debt in this period, trying to try treatments. Also our time, for if your animal needs medication 8 times a day, you're not going to be going out and hanging out with your friends. You're going to be home. You're going to be there attending to your animal. And there's also a physical component to this, whether it's doing sub-Q fluids or medicated baths or cleaning up after incontinence or lifting your animal up and down stairs they can't climb anymore. Whatever it is, there's a tremendous physical aspect, that adds to the grief. And then, of course, all the emotional stuff. Many people feel angry. They feel angry at their animal for getting sick or for abandoning them. They feel resentment at all the changes that have come. They feel jealous of people who have happy animals, which we talked about on our last podcast. A tremendous guilt about why didn't I catch this? Why didn't I do it sooner? Am I doing the right thing? Or even wanting it to be over and wanting some relief, and the fear that's coming about when will this happen and what will it be like? And of course, hope that maybe things will get better, maybe we'll turn a corner, and then the bitterness of that hope when things don't improve, and a lot of self-blame. I could be doing more, why am I not doing more? This, of course, affects our spiritual life. Where will they go? Where will they be? And our cognitive pieces, hypervigilance. A lot of people are in a massive state of hypervigilance all the time, afraid when they're walking in the door that their animal's going to be dead, afraid something will happen in the middle of the night, not sleeping, not leaving their animal alone, the hypervigilance. And social, my goodness, the social judgment. You get a lot of judgment from people about the level of treatment you're doing, your treatment choices, not being able to show up to parties and outings because you're on your medicine schedule. And so there's so much social sacrifice and adjustment. And all around this is the question, when is it going to happen? And that looming question is kind of at the core of the anticipatory grief, and it's incredibly difficult to navigate through. It's one of the reasons that if you can get some support during this period, it's the kindest thing you can do for yourself. I wish every veterinarian would hand my business card or the business card of somebody who works in pet loss of grief anticipatory specialist to get support immediately, because all of these things are going to happen and it's tough to go through alone.
And all of those things you mentioned, each one is really big, heavy stuff. The medications, the being the caregiver, always worrying about them, every snuffle or scratch, you're waking up in the middle of the night, and it's just this heavy, continuous process. Like it's a really difficult time.
Yeah, it is. It's in some ways it's harder than post-loss grief. And I don't ever like to compare types of grief, but we're talking about anticipatory, and I'm going to say it. There are aspects of it that are harder to handle than some of the post-loss grief things. And so I really encourage any of you, if any of you are experiencing this, do reach out and try to get some support, because we can develop a lot of bad habits in our self-care during anticipatory grief. We can become very isolated, and we're under so much pressure and so much pain, and we feel like people won't understand. And so there's just a lot of, it's a very difficult time. And so if you are going through this, just know you are not alone. There's a lot of support to be had. And one of the best ways to support yourself is really working to, try to maintain a sense of normalcy, both for you and your animal. Try to center their experience and, try as hard as you can to view this as a real opportunity to step up for your animal and to be there for them and to bond with them through this. And it's okay if you're uncertain. It's okay if you don't know what's going to happen, doing your best to sort of allow that uncertainty to be. And talk to your animal, talk to them about what's happening, let them know what's going on. Listen to what they have to say, see how they can help guide you. They want to help you through this. So engage in conversations with them. Please don't scream and wail and yell and freak out at them, because that'll scare them. That'll make them feel like something's going on. But have conversations with them about, you're going through this treatment. How's it going for you? How's it feeling? Do you want to continue treatment? How do you feel about your end of life? Is there anything I can do to make your end of life more special? Really having those conversations with your beloved can be very powerful. And many people are too afraid to talk about it. And then they never get to have those conversations.
Yeah, that's very true. And something that I always look at the clock. We've got about 6-7 minutes left. And in this time, I'd really love us to touch on, I know these are all big things that we're kind of highlighting today, and these are only like highlights, but something that when we lose a beloved pet, one of the strategies to to help you feel close to them is the continuing bond, is making sure that you're still talking to them, and you might have a little ritual or a little photo of them, or go to a special place, or like I love one of your ones that always saying their name, and when you get a takeaway coffee, like, what's your name? Maisie. Oh, coffee for Maisie. And all that kind of
Have you
stuff.
tried that yet, Barb? Have you tried it yet?
I haven't
You gotta try it.
No, I haven't tried it yet.
It's so good. You gotta try it. Next time we talk, I'm not coming on again unless you've done it.
Okay, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll definitely do it. But one thing is like the spiritual side. And I was never a spiritual person, really. I always believed in something, but until I saw with my first dog, I cannot describe the feeling of when I saw her spirit leave her body, and I was like a non-believer. So I'm just telling everyone point blank here, I saw something white and something whoosh off from her head up, and I went, holy, I swore, I was like, holy, what is that? And that was the beginning of my spiritual connection with both of my animals. One thing that really comes to mind when we talk about spirituality and passing and grief and loss with beloved pets is something called the Rainbow Bridge. And I find that I purposely haven't really looked into it because I really wanted to hear it from you, is where has this come about? Is it real? What is this thing called Rainbow Bridge?
Oh, this is a big one. Well, okay. Can I just say a couple things about spirituality first before we get into the Rainbow Bridge? Okay. So, first of all, you are not alone. Anyone listening, you're not alone. I trained actually as a pet chaplain. So I'm a pet chaplain, and I did training specifically about spiritual support for people and their animals going through this, because I could see in my work that it didn't matter if you didn't have any kind of spiritual belief at all, or you had a very set construction, you were a religious person and you believed very deeply in one thing. It doesn't matter wherever you are on that spectrum. This type of loss is going to bring up questions. It's going to bring up wonder. It's going to bring up confusion, right? So in my work, I could see very quickly, we got to do a lot of spiritual support for people on this. And the thing is, faith is faith. So what we believe, regardless of what it is kind of up to us, right? And there's no one answer. There's no, if any of us knew, if I knew how it worked, it's just way beyond my pay grade. If I knew how it worked, I'd be a billionaire, right? None of us really know how it works. So when it comes to spirituality and loss, it's important to support whatever and wherever you are, whatever you believe and wherever you are on it. The Rainbow Bridge started as a poem, and there's like a lot of dispute about who the original author was, but it was a lovely little poem about the idea that when our animals die, they all go to the Rainbow Bridge, which is sort of like a place that isn't heaven. It's like heaven adjacent, I guess. And they wait there for us until we come meet them in heaven. That's what the Rainbow Bridge, it was a poem, and it became a poem that many people sent to each other when they heard about a pet loss. And then eventually in pet loss communities and things, people started talking about the Rainbow Bridge, and the Rainbow Bridge brings many people a lot of comfort. So any of you out there that are pro Rainbow Bridge, if that makes you feel awesome, go for it. Right? I am here for it. I love anyone who loves the Rainbow Bridge. But I will tell you that a lot of people do not relate to this idea of the Rainbow Bridge. They have a lot of questions about it. They're like, if it's like a waiting room, are they alone? Does that mean there aren't other people there? Are they not reunited with my family? I don't even believe in heaven, so why do I believe in the Rainbow Bridge, right? So, there's a lot of people that have questions. In fact, I talk about this a lot on my Instagram, because a lot of pet loss stuff on Instagram is like only pro Rainbow Bridge, and you actually never hear another narrative. And I am not anti-Rainbow Bridge, but I am much more inclusive about whatever feels supportive to you. So, when I poll my audience on Instagram, they very often, only about 50% of my followers who answer the poll anyway, resonate with the idea of the Rainbow Bridge. So that leaves a whole lot of people who either have another belief about afterlife, or people who have zero belief about afterlife, et cetera, et cetera. So, spiritual questions always come up, and spiritual questions come up around signs, right? Because signs are a big thing, with pet loss. And I have a lot of clients who come to me I'm like, I don't believe in signs. Signs aren't a thing. And, it's fine with me. And then they start getting signs. And now they're like major believers in signs, right? And so I think like our spiritual work in this, our spiritual opportunity is to just remain open and see what evolves and see what changes, and to not force ourselves into believing a narrative. And in fact, things like the Rainbow Bridge can be really offensive to people. Like people always say, oh, should I send the Rainbow Bridge something? I'm like, I wouldn't send it unless you know for sure they love it. It's very important to pay attention to grievers when they talk about their experience spiritually. So if they use the word heaven and say, then you can talk about, that I believe Maisie's in heaven. Or, if they talk about Rainbow Bridge, be like, oh yeah, Maisie's at the Rainbow Bridge, whatever someone says. But if they don't mention it, don't bring it up, because many people are just figuring it out. And I do believe grief is a transformative experience. It can be an opportunity for spiritual growth if you are led in that direction. I think it's very powerful to learn about other spiritual traditions and what they do with animals and animal death. And, all these things, there's so much we can learn and grow, but to also not pressure yourself to subscribe to any particular belief if it doesn't truly resonate with you. And so I think very gentle explorations of spirituality are welcome. I love using like tarot cards. I got a lot of my clients into doing tarot because that's another way to sort of express spiritually. But the main thing that I talk about all the time is that you can continue a connection with your animal, regardless of what your spiritual beliefs are. Because the kind of connection and continuing bonds I'm talking about are not predicated on animal communications or pet psychics or beliefs in religion, right? It's predicated on your relationship and the essence of your relationship and who the two of you are together. And that's the connection that will remain forever. That's what you can tap into. That's what's always around you and carried with you. And so a big focus for me is how to keep that connection growing, how to keep it vibrant, how to keep it evolving and deepening over the years. And that can happen regardless of any spiritual belief.
Yeah. What a way to wrap up a podcast. I know that we could have talked a lot longer, but I want to, I hope we will continue to talk. And like, if there's anything else, I definitely I just love this bond that we've got and the connection and talking about, making this a community of people to come in and get this podcast whenever they need it. So thank you so much for joining me, Beth. And I know that we'll talk again soon.
Definitely. Can I say one thing for anyone listening too? Over on my Instagram page, which is Honoring Our Animals, I do a monthly memorial service. So if any of you have lost an animal, it doesn't matter when that was. You can look on my page. I'll put an announcement out a couple days, and I do it every single month. I'll put an announcement out a couple days in advance for your name and your animal's name. And if it feels supportive to you, I will include your animal's name in my monthly memorial service. And for many of you, if you haven't had your animal's death publicly acknowledged and kind of participated in a ritual, this might feel very supportive to you. So you're all invited to submit for that. You can do that via my page on Instagram. And I would love to honor any of your animals in that memorial service next month when I do it.
Excellent. And what's the, where can I find you? Just on your Instagram page? What's the...
Yeah, and my Instagram is at Honoring Our Animals, or my website is honoringouranimals.com. But on my Instagram is where I post the call for names for the memorial every month. I usually do that a few days in advance, and then people just DM me with their name and the name of their beloved. And I read it during the live service. We all get together once a month and I do a little reflection and remembrance and service. And I read everyone's name and send you off with some affirmations and some poetry and hope. And it's just a beautiful time to build community and feel some comfort and connection.
There you go, guys. Check it out. Thank you so much for everything that you do for the world.
Thank you so much, Barb. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and it has inspired you on your self-care journey. Please feel free to share this with a friend and subscribe over on Apple Podcast. I really love hearing your feedback. So guys, please feel free to write a review on Apple and let me know which part of this episode resonated with you the most. To fall in love with yourself is the first secret to happiness. To find out a bit more about Self-Care Studio or the Studio Chat podcast, head over to my Instagram page, self_care_studio, or on my website, selfcarebybarbara.thompson.com.au. Really look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Look after you. And I'll catch you soon. Bye!